So here we are outside the Insight Retreat Center. We have kind of a busy road, and especially with I think the weekend, we're gonna have some people coming in, and I feel like, we have some barrier here, a bit of a sanctuary that we're entering. So let's just come on along, and I'll show you around the grounds a little bit, and we'll see the building. So I'll just point out these stairs. We recently added them, and I feel like we just need people to walk on them, kind of break them in so they don't stand out so much. So we're near the kitchen here, and I just want to show some of the potted plants, and we have dwarf lemon trees. All these strawberries are coming out, and we're eating away. It's keeping us busy. So we have a little succulent garden here. It's kind of done blooming, but the succulents are just beautiful this time of year. And today I feel like we're just early July, so the June blooms passed. We're not getting those foggy days. It's almost like on fall. So we have herbs and more strawberries and skies, and you can see probably a lot of mint. So we kind of strategically place some of these things here so people in the kitchen can sneak out and mindfully, of course, grab some herbs and continue cooking. And it's a fun place to be here. So we'll run through the kitchen, and we have a commercial kitchen up here, and it's mostly quiet. We're just for our small kitchen, so I have the image and the sounds and the smells of this place, with the lights bright and a lot of people working, and a lot of volunteers kind of being service leaders and supporting the retreat and also participating in the retreat. So it's been kind of sweet to participate in the all-night retreat, just to remember the people that we're serving and the people that we're connecting with. So this is the community room here, and just being here, I feel kind of this lightness, and I think the rising sun in the morning, just the brightness and the spaciousness here. The acoustics are all different, and just the layout. We have the different statues, and just even the carpet. I feel like it's so ingrained in my memory. Just I kind of feel settled here, and it's just a really nice place to be. So a lot of the retreats start here kind of midday, and we all sit in a circle, and it's kind of a time to share and connect, form a group of people, bring them together. So we have the teacher usually sit here, and we go around and just kind of introduce ourselves. So it's hoping to do a little bit of that in the intro, and maybe we can just peek around and go upstairs and look at the meditation hall. Usually, fill up these shoe racks all the way, and people are kind of in their, all bunched up here, putting their shoes on, taking their shoes off, and a lot of times just here, we're indoors, so. So now we're upstairs. This is where the meditation hall is. And just want to show you this little kind of quiet lounge area. And you know, a lot of people will either they've been sitting or they want to take kind of a lounge here. So this is a nice area to relax. And, you know, I personally remember falling asleep here a few times, and you know, it's just a nice way to kind of change things up and relax. So we can look at the watering station. We have our people get water here before and after retreat, and you know, again, kind of a lot of energy around this area. And it's all relative, you know, our retreats people are so kind of inwards. Things are moving slower, so just interesting to see this energy. So we have our cushions on the right, and we have more cushions here. The walking hall is through here. So, yeah. So I'm just gonna turn off the computer in there real quick. So you can probably see we have the meditation hall set up a little differently. There's a little bit more tech in here. So we're, you know, as we transition to online, where we have the camera here, we have computer here. So it's a little different, and you know, I don't really want to say too much in the hall. It's kind of just a very quiet, still place for me. So I was just hoping we can look around for a minute or two. So I'll just make a few announcements before we start the retreat. So we're going to have our teacher is going to be Matthew Brensilver. So I'll hand it off to him in a second. Just like the other retreats, we'll have community time, and the password is Metta. That's METTA, and we'll announce that again. So no worries if you don't get it now. So, you know, I'm just happy to be here, and I'm going to hand it off to Matthew now. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Thank you, Stas. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I appreciate the intro, and happy to be seeing IRC, and yeah, appreciative of the efforts behind the scenes. There was actually, for you out there on YouTube, there was actually a countdown to go live. It was like a NASA launch kind of situation. And anyway, so there's a lot happening in the background just to port IRC in, and then me in, and happy to be with all of you. And now I'm looking at the emoji that I tweeted. Is that inappropriate to have 2 heart eyes? Is that like reserved for romantic partners? I don't know, but that's what I tweeted in appreciation. And I'll get up on my emoji game before COVID is over. And yeah, I'm happy to be with you. So it's often said that Buddhism is less interested in freedom to, and more interested in freedom from. Freedom from what? Freedom from greed, hatred, and delusion. Yeah, and when the heart gets increasingly free of that, other things fall into place. But releasing that suffering is often a very slow thaw, a slow thawing process. And as I was reflecting on it, we have almost like this intuitive sense that that our suffering serves some higher aim, yeah, that it's necessary in some way. And I think we can say pain serves a function. Pain serves a function. It alerts us to damage, to tissue. It alerts us to what is actually a threat to bodily integrity. And it's a problem not to feel pain. There's actually a rare genetic condition where people do not feel pain, and it's not easy actually to live that way. But in the Dharma, we do distinguish pain and suffering. We distinguish the inevitability of unpleasantness that's woven into the fabric of being human from the burden on the heart that we call suffering. And it's almost like suffering sends the wrong signal to our minds, that suffering feels like there's some, in each moment of suffering, it feels like there's some profound message in the bottle, yeah? It feels necessary. But I believe part of what we come to learn in practice is it's less necessary than we think. Is anxiety required for action? Is despair required for empathy? Is self-righteousness required for us to be persuasive? What would it look like to have no loyalty to our suffering? What would it look like to have no loyalty to our suffering? I think many things. We can explore this as we sit in a minute. What would it look like to have no loyalty to our suffering? Well, for one, it might be that we start to develop some faith that that suffering can become non-suffering. Yeah, just actual faith in that it is possible to redeem suffering. Yeah, it's possible to redeem suffering. That is what we do in practice. But we have to be patient, and part of releasing loyalty to our suffering might be not insisting on immediate answers, but instead finding some of that faith, finding a kind of heart trajectory. Yeah, we don't know the answer. We don't know exactly how to respond to this moment of dukkha, but we're not going to compulsively look for its solution. but rest. This is writer Ken MacLeod. Says, a few times in my life I have been in difficult situations in which I could not see any way forward. In my morning practice sessions, I would, to the best of my ability, rest in the confusion that swirled inside me. I suppose it was the years of effort that made that resting possible, even though through all those years, those efforts had seemed paltry and ineffective. When I could rest in the confusion, it grew quiet and dark, the quiet of a dark night with no moon or stars. As I rested in that darkness, a clarity would sometimes arise, and with it, a sense of a direction. How or what discerned that clarity or direction, I don't know, but both were there. The clarity didn't illumine anything. It didn't make anything in the situation clearer. It just indicated a direction. Where that direction led or what I would encounter, I had no idea. There was a direction, nothing more. And so sometimes in the cauldron of suffering, we have to give up our loyalty to our suffering means to rest. To actually rest, and not immediately seek the answer, to not look for the message in the bottle, at least not right now. We just actually rest in the quiet, in the darkness. And then maybe we start to sense a heart direction. Yeah. Start to sense a heart direction. Need not be words, need not be something you can articulate. We start to sense a heart direction. So let us sit together. Let us rest together on this day, in this time. And relinquish loyalty to dukkha. So please find a posture that feels sustainable. Whatever helps you settle in to your posture, whatever posture that is. find your way into some sense of groundedness. Maybe it feels important to remind yourself of a kind of intention. Maybe it feels important to remember the goodness of all who have supported us. Maybe there's some kind of felt connection with the historical figure of the Buddha. Whose teachings remain alive after all these years. And we might settle in together by taking first some breaths that we really feel in our bellies. Just let your belly soften. Relinquish any self-consciousness, any hardening, any judgment. Just let your belly be your belly and let it be soft. Be aware of the breath as it expands into the right side and left side of your torso. Feeling all of the expansions and contractions, the energy tightening up, opening up. Now, perhaps breathing in such a way that you feel your breath across your whole body, as if each cell is nourished by the breath. Maybe it feels natural to let the breath be totally natural. So one teacher says to not try to train the breath, but let your breath train you. And so I'll be quiet now. We'll sit together in silence. But whenever you notice a certain kind of investment, a certain kind of loyalty to your suffering, do not insist on an answer, but rest. Rest in a certain kind of faith that suffering is redeemed through presence. The heart finds its own posture. Maybe not an answer, but a direction. in these last couple minutes, wherever you are, wherever your heart is, maybe there's some recognition that everything is fuel for waking up. Everything. We hold our lives with care, with clarity, with wisdom. Experience terminates in freedom. So thank you. It's good to sit with you. So you're invited, if your body permits, to have a period of walking, and just a few words about that. The traditional kind of anchor point for walking is the sensations of your feet moving through space, sensing the kind of lifting, swinging, placing, and as the mind settles and permits, it's like we take in thinner and thinner slices of time, more and more data from the feet. And so you're welcome to do that. Sometimes it's useful to be very simple. Find a pace of walking that feels like it sustains mindfulness, that it balances the energy. And sometimes, I'll even narrow the attentional focus to one toe or something like this, just to really encourage my mind to have to look carefully. And so the sensations can be the anchor point, but I just want to give another option, which is given that people find walking is a kind of bridge between sitting meditation and our life. Yeah. And so our eyes are open, we're moving. This is actually much more evocative for our system. And it may be soothing in a certain way, but just having the visual field is the contact of the visual field stimulates so much mental proliferation. And it's almost like the visual field is the background music to our ruminations. And so another alternative would be to make sound, external sounds, and the internal sounds of your own thinking, your own discursive voice, the anchor. Yeah. And so what we're doing is it's almost like the soundscape runs right through our own heads. And so we're listening outwards to sound, to silence, to the fading away of sounds, the arising of sounds. And we're listening internally when we become identified with discursive thought. When we're identified with discursive thought, we're not hearing it, we're obeying it. And so the invitation is to actually let the soundscape run right through your head. You're really, in a sense, not distinguishing between inner noise or words, thinking, and external sound, yeah? It's one soundscape, and you are just listening. If you're have an injury or mobility limitations, I trust you have a way of practicing that feels native to your heart. But any kind of movement is suitable for as an attentional anchor. And might even, for anybody might, rest a hand on the heart, face, arm, just kind of gentle, pleasant caress of the body, an anchor to that pleasantness. Yeah. So, that's this is our walking practice. You can see the IRC walking hall is featured there on YouTube, and it is about 10:10 California time, and so we'll plan to return in half an hour, 10:40. And you'll hear some of the resident volunteers ring a bell. You'll also be visible in the walking hall, so we can sort of lean on their energy and dedication to support our practice, our walking. And we'll gather back at 10:40 and have another sit and talk and some discussion. Yeah. Okay. So please enjoy the period of some movement, and we'll gather back. Thank you. So we'll sit again together quietly. Just feel the effects of the movement and sitting this day, this week, this life. It all rushes into the present. And in a certain way, to not have loyalty to our suffering is to bless this past, to bless all of the momentum that we call the present moment, to bless it with wisdom and love. Hmm. It's good to practice with you. So recently, a friend, meditator, was describing all of these intellectual kind of explorations, really trying to answer questions about happiness. And um, the forays into these kind of intellectual zones were sort of intriguing, but not deeply satisfying. And then she described how she did a kind of meditation practice on the advice of a friend to attend first to the head, then to the kind of heart, and then to the belly. And in doing that kind of practice, what she found was that she described a certain kind of like top heaviness, yeah, where there's a lot of access up here, but then heart and especially belly felt more remote. And so the topic for the kind of reflection this morning is head and heart, head, heart, body. How do head and heart actually work together on this path? And it comes out of a conversation I had with one of the RVs who said, sort of like I asked like, okay, what might be a good topic for this morning? And their response was something like metta in action. And that felt right. And I was sort of sitting with that. And I was thinking about love both as a kind of love as being necessary in this moment, but not sufficient. Yeah, necessary, we need it, but it's not all we need. And somehow that kind of led me into this reflection on head and heart, because it feels to me like we need both. We need the kind of vitality and groundedness of embodiment. We need the juiciness of love. We need the unobstructed flow of information from our body, and we need the cool discernment and careful thinking that we associate with the head. Yeah. So I understand why the head thinking is not emphasized. We arrive in practice not even knowing how much we've trusted our thinking, and to a large extent, our life is a collection of ruminations. Yeah, we're so deeply wedded to thinking. We're so top heavy, and we're disembodied often. There are all these layers of thinking, of hope and fear, of conceptualizing ourselves, what life is, what happiness is, what the future ought to be, what we want. All of this is like the layers of story. And without really knowing it, we kind of live almost in a fairy tale or a series of fairy tales, right? It's part of why those books are like very soothing to some part of us, yeah? But that gets problematic, of course, right? So we come into practice and we start to see how it's almost like our default response to sensory experience is papancha, mental proliferation, yeah? It's like sights and sounds and sensations, emotion in the body, images in the mind, like all of this, it's like on contact with that, there is mental proliferation. And it feels like thinking is almost like the only dial that we have to adjust our lives, bombarded with sensation, with sight and sound. It's like, oh, how do I find my place amidst the deluge? How do I find my place? And we try to find our place by thinking everything to death. And so early in practice, it's so important to get a kind of felt relationship with your body, yeah, to wake up to embodiment. This is Kirisaro, who had a very long, many decades, I think 45 years of history with Ajahn Sucitto, and as you know, young monks together. And I think last year there's a kind of collection of reflections on Ajahn Sucitto's life and appreciations, and gathered some of his teachings. And so this is Kirisaro reflecting on Ajahn Sucitto from 4 decades earlier. He says, rather than viewing enlightenment as something to be conquered, Ajahn Sucitto began to see the path as one of healing, realizing that to a large extent he had become disembodied, like so many of us, and aware that many styles of meditation perpetuate and even exacerbate staying up in the head. He studied the Buddha's original teachings on samadhi and saw that they emphasized a profound rootedness in the body, training ourselves progressively to be sensitive to the whole body as we breathe in and out, calming the whole body as we breathe in and out. I'll never forget his exclaiming to me, "Who took the body out of Buddhism?" So he dedicated himself to practicing conscious embodiment, mindfulness of the body. He began to balance unrelenting effort with embodied ease, and the results are impressive. I've seen the blessing of embodied practice transform Ajahn Sucitto from a clumsy, awkward, top-heavy genius into a calm, radiant, grounded, poised, balanced, and graceful presence. So the experience of the very experience of what we're here for, of some bit of freedom, involves our body in ways I don't even feel like I really understand but it's as if insight is felt as a kind of deep alignment with one's body. Maybe you have some intuitive feel for that. Yeah, but like insight, clarity, wisdom, freedom is felt as a kind of, as being in a sort of in a deep alignment with one's body. It almost feels like a physical property of the body, like akin to flexibility or something. Yeah. And maybe we know this from the way that insight gets in our bones, the way we really feel it, like, oh, I know this in my bones. Yeah. Oh, I've heard that teaching 1,000 times, but somehow this time it penetrated. Yeah. It entered the field of the body. The body is so central, yeah, to our path, this kind of the juiciness of the body. It's said, of course, that the path is about releasing clinging, right? Um, but where do we actually work with clinging? I think it's in the Anguttara Nikaya. It said something like, all dhammas converge on feeling. All dhammas converge on feeling. And the way I read that is that the importance of phenomena, of sights and sounds and physical sensations, like the importance of that is primarily in how we feel. Yeah. And this is deeper than just emotion. This is a broader kind of category of feeling. So this is the brain scientist Antonio Damasio. Feelings accompany the unfolding of life. Whatever one perceives, learns, remembers, imagines, reasons, judges, decides, plans, or mentally creates is accompanied by feeling. Regarding feelings as occasional visitors to the mind or caused only by the typical emotions do not do justice to the ubiquity and importance of the phenomena. Most every image in the main procession we call mind, from the moment the item enters the mental spotlight of attention until it leaves, has a feeling by its side. Images are so desperate for emotional company that even the images that constitute a prominent feeling can be accompanied by other feelings, a bit like the harmonics of a sound or the circles that form once a pebble hits the water surface. There is no being in the proper sense of the term without a spontaneous mental experience of life, a feeling of existence. The ground zero of being corresponds to a deceptively continuous and endless feeling state, a more or less intense mental choir underscoring everything else. In my practice, nothing has been as important as attuning to the feeling circuits in the body, the emotion and the urges, the motivations, maybe we say intentions in the body. And equanimity, which is so central in this path of practice, feels so much like it is equanimity with body sensations, right? There's emphasized in Goenka's approach, for example, but reactivity and compulsivity depend on a kind of unconscious relationship with our bodies, with the sensations of our bodies. And so a kind of coming into a conscious relationship, a non-compulsive relationship with the circuits of feeling in the body is so important. And in this journey, we learn what we can trust and what we can't trust. Yeah, it's not like the body is invariably kind of giving us signals of wisdom, right? We actually have to learn what to listen to and what to disregard. Yeah. What ways in which the body gets tangled up in suffering, ways in which we maintain loyalty to a certain kind of suffering that I spoke of earlier. So I remember the story that Larry Rosenberg told about being in Asia in I think it's the early 70s, and they're gathered around. I don't know whether it was a Zen master or what the lineage was, but gathered around the master and kind of motley crew of people, including Larry and this another guy, American, kind of Larry described him as sort of like a hippie, and from that time. And the teacher asked this guy, says, like, why are you here? What are you here? And the hippie looking guy says, I'm following my heart. And the master started laughing kind of hysterically, like you're following your heart, you're following that defiled, greedy, know nothing. Your heart's what got you into this whole mess, right? And sort of chastising him, like, wait a second, that's not a reliable organ yet, yeah. And so, in a way, before we practice, before we train, we can't follow our heart. We have to train our heart. It said, Ajahn Sumedho said, like, we train our heart before it can be followed. But once trained, it becomes a source of deep wisdom, of intuitive wisdom. When we really know ourselves, we can start to trust our feelings, trust these kind of very primitive signals from our body. And often what the body says is nothing more than yes or no. And I have lived a lot of my adult life in accord with those yeses and those nos. And I feel like all those yeses, all those nos have been wise counsel. They've not been a kind of mouthpiece of my defilements. There's been wisdom there. Yeah, there's kind of getting into alignment with this dimension of our being. the body is so important in a question. It's a question we don't really ask so much in Dharma scenes, but what do you want? What do you want? That is important. It's almost touching to say it. What do you want? Not what do the kilesas want, the forces of greed, hatred, delusion. What do you want? And given all that you know about yourself, given what feels possible to let go and what feels impossible to let go, given what feels impossible to let go, given all you know about your personality, your temperament, your habits, given all you know about yourself, what do you want? What is worth taking a kind of stand for? Knowing that invariably wanting is complicated, yeah? But we can still ask, we can still follow something, that thread. What do we want? Our embodiment has so much just very important relational effects. We learn, in a sense, to be with others with our body. We learn to listen with our body, right? It's like the field of our own body, our own connection with the rhythms and flows of our heart, of embodiment itself. This is so central in actually receiving the being of another, yeah, of making space for another to have their experience. That depends on a certain kind of embodiment in us. And so this helps us attune to others. It helps us attune to others. And of course, in this embodiment, the heart side of this equation, love, our deep, unembarrassed animal love, depends on our body, right? It depends on our body. And we need this love, of course. Yeah. I said that image of from the Buddhist tradition of love functioning as the glue of the world, love holding the world together. And its dissolution makes anything possible. Yeah. All goodness is at risk when love dissolves. But love, embodiment, they're necessary conditions for a good life, but not sufficient. Yeah. Necessary, but not sufficient. There is a place for what we call, in very sloppy ways, head, yeah? Head and heart. And naturally, as I've said, because we're so prone to get lost in thinking, Buddhist practice has really minimized the value of careful thinking, of contemplation, of internal debate, of using words, right? Well, I mean, wise view, the basis for the path, that depends on reflection, that depends on a certain kind of internal debate. It depends on contemplation, and this is part of our spiritual path. Yeah, the world is it's so full of wonder. Yeah, and part of actually how we access that wonder is through very potent ideas. Ideas that almost stop the mind. An idea is, it can dramatically expand our world. Our experience can be dramatically expanded by an idea. And we're beginning to integrate the ideas of Dharma that is important, but not just Dharma. Yeah, the world is like far too full, far too wondrous for only one voice, one dialect, one discourse to have the last word. Yeah. And so part of living, I feel, a full life is being responsive to this, like, this thirst to know, to understand, to be responsive to evidence, to new evidence. That's not a sexy word, evidence, yeah, but it's important. And evidence, new evidence, can't be known in advance. It's never complete. I don't feel like we can ever stop looking for delusion. We can always be expanded by a new idea, by a new understanding. And so we in a sense have always lived our lives on the basis of a certain kind of evidence. Our philosophy of life, how we've approached life, has been on the basis of a certain kind of understanding. But that expanding can grow, it can grow. And so we become responsive. Life becomes this kind of open feedback loop. And this requires our heads. This requires careful, quiet thinking. It requires experiments. We do experiments in our life where we try something else out. We try looking a different way. We add a certain thought. We behave a certain way, and then we see what happens, what learning happens. Yeah. The Buddha said to understand the Dharma is to understand causality, dependent co-arising, paticca samuppada. And most of that is done in the kind of in the sensory system of contact and of this embodied feeling and craving and clinging and suffering. We explore it mostly in the sensory domain, but some of understanding causality, some of understanding cause and effect has to come through our heads, has to come through careful understanding. What is happening here? What leads to what? And the Buddha himself was a kind of staggering analytical genius. It's like to start to put together the Buddha Dhamma, like it's just experience is almost unimaginably befuddling. And yet he sort of carved nature at its joints. Yeah, and found the places where suffering becomes possible. That took a lot of analysis, yeah. And in general, we do come to trust our bodies, trust our embodiment, but we can't always trust our gut because there are distortions, just the way our system works. There are distortions. And there are even distortions in very beautiful feelings, like the arising of the heart. And so this is just one example, but there are like distortions in how our own empathic circuits work. Yeah. Mostly, I trust the responsivity of my heart, the circuits of empathy and care, but we can't trust them without any question. So for example, like there's research around like the distortions of empathy. Yeah, that empathy is often a wise counsel, but sometimes it deludes us. Yeah. And so our empathic responses betray, for example, like an in-group favoritism. Yeah, we're more likely to have empathic responses to people of our own group, whatever group that is. Yeah. Empathy, when we're confronted with 100 people who need help, we have a less empathic response than when it's one person. Yeah, we actually down-regulate our empathy in the face of many. Maybe it feels overwhelming in some way, but we want to be careful. These are like ways in which our heart can needs careful consideration and distance. Right, we're so much more empathic to what's happening right here rather than maybe a distant place. Yeah, more across an ocean, but there's not a morally significant reason to care less about somebody who's not right here. And so this is using this as an example where we need to be thoughtful. We need to be thoughtful. We need to pair head and heart, to think carefully and to channel the wisdom of the body to rest in the kind of juiciness of love, of embodied love, but marrying it in some way, wedding it to careful thinking. And it's a quiet thinking. It's not the ruminative kind of thinking where we get completely lost. So we can actually wed head and heart in the Eightfold Path, right? Which contains both sides, I feel. This is Bhikkhu Bodhi, and then I'll conclude. To follow the Noble Eightfold Path is a matter of practice rather than intellectual knowledge, but to apply the path correctly, it has to be properly understood. In fact, right understanding of the path is itself part of the practice. It is a facet of right view, the first path factor, the forerunner and guide for the rest of the path. Thus, though initial enthusiasm might suggest that the task of intellectual comprehension may be shelved as a bothersome distraction, mature consideration reveals it to be quite essential to ultimate success in the practice. So in our lives, in our practice, how can we wed head and heart? How can we come into deep alignment? And when we can't, yeah, when head and heart don't seem to point in exactly the same direction, can we be patient? Yeah, can we be patient in not papering over the gap. Yeah, just we're patient. We sit in the silence, in the quiet, in the dark. We rest, and then we find a direction. So I offer this for your consideration, and any questions, comments, inquiries, you can chat in, and we have 10 minutes or so, and I will try to respond as best I can. Oh, okay, I see. And did Kitty Sorrow make that comment about Ajahn Sucitto in a place where we can read or hear? Yeah, it is a freely available book of kind of reflections on Ajahn Sucitto and reflections from him. And so, if you Google should take care of it, but I've forgotten the name, but it's quite lovely. A very kind of tribute to him. Yeah, so question, did you mean to go to the body if the head and heart are not quite in alignment? Thanks for asking that. Yeah, that's probably a good default move, yeah. But yeah, we do, I think, in a lot of times, if we have to choose between the counsel of subtle sensations bubbling up, versus kind of ruminative story, go with the body. But there are times, that where they don't fully align, and we sort of like rush in to close the gap somehow, or we act out one or the other. And there's a way in which I want to have a certain kind of like reverence for that not knowing, yeah, for not being fully in alignment, and just to actually rest there, to rest in that uncertainty, to rest in not knowing, to rest with the cacophony of voices, yeah, the voice of the body, of the heart, of the mind, and not to prematurely kind of paper over that gap, yeah, and then see what arises, Uh, what thoughts do you, hey Phil, what thoughts do you allow to flow freely, and what do you just drop? Are there other tools do you use with thoughts? So there are different species of thoughts, maybe we can say, And you almost start to learn the tone of voice in the mind. We literally listen to the tone of voice of our thinking. And that can give us a clue as to what is worth considering. The ruminative species of thinking, where we are very lost in a kind of abstraction, and it feels like the thoughts are sort of creating our world in that moment. Yeah, there's like a deep identification with it, very little metacognitive awareness. We're not aware of thinking as thinking. That is a less trustworthy form of thought, I feel. It can be soothing to ruminate in a certain way. Yeah, sometimes when we've been giving our attention to something, to our breath, to another person, to a task, it's like the way we rest is to ruminate. Yeah, it can be soothing, but I trust the species of thought that is a kind of quieter, where it feels like I'm just waiting. Yeah. Maybe grappling with something, but the tone of voice is different. The compulsivity is different. Feels like there's wisdom present. It's not like I'm trying to turn the dial of thought to get out of dukkha. Yeah. Sometimes we try to turn the dial of thought to get out of suffering. Yeah. And that has a kind of uh, yeah, that's a species of thought that we learn not to trust. So this is a point for investigation. This is a point for us to explore. Yeah, what kind of thinking is trustworthy? It'll sound like Dharma. Yeah, it'll have a certain respect for not knowing. It'll be open to emerging evidence. It will be patient. Yeah. Will tend to be quieter. And then we try to learn. Yeah, we try to be responsive to, we try things out. What if I tried out this idea? What if head and heart come together in this way? What if I live from that? What does that do? And then we just keep learning. We keep learning. Yeah, life as an open feedback loop. Head, heart, responsive to life. So have to stop. I see other things in the chat. Damasio, I see a question about that. Antonio Damasio. Anyway, I'll take a look there. But I want to thank you for your practice on this this day that has all sorts of meanings, all sorts of evoking many different things in head and heart. And I want to thank, of course, the resident volunteer crew that I'm very grateful for, and just yeah, a lot of affection for what's happening. And yeah, it's like, how do you? This is the question right now. How do you create a Dharma field on YouTube? Right? How do we do this on Zoom? How do we actually find ways of doing what the meditation hall usually does, what the presence of each other's bodies do? Like, how do we do this when the sun is rising and setting at different times for us? How do we do this? And we're trying. The RVs are trying, obviously experimenting. with how you build a Dhamma field. And I'm feeling like it works, and I'm grateful. And so I'm going to hand it over to Stas, who will, as an announcement for the community groups, if you wish to join. And so I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to you, Stas.
Everybody, so it's been just really sweet to sit with everyone, and Matthew, thank you for your teachings. And I just have a few announcements. So next Wednesday, we're going to have a mini retreat with Andrea Castillo. So that's coming up. And right after this, we're going to have a community time. So the password for that is Metta, METTA. And I'm going to hand it off to Lish, who's going to help facilitate that. All righty, see you everybody.